Yes.
Okay, Rabbi Fuchs Kreimer.
Okay.
We are ready for you.
Let me first apologize for stepping out on Justice's talk this morning, but I'm putting the finishing touches on another grant proposal, and so I just there was a time-sensitive element. So hi, everybody. It's fun to talk to my dean and my rabbi at the same time, with your permission. So, in 1941, Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, who was the founder of our movement, shocked the traditional Jewish world by publishing the new Haggadah. Now, many of you have seen hundreds of different kinds of Haggadot, and so that's the traditional liturgy for the Passover Seder, of which there are many now. But back in those days, there was just the Haggadah, and Rabbi Kaplan put out a humanistic, universalistic version of this Passover Exodus story. And it was really the beginning of what we think of as our radical, forward-thinking, pushing the envelope, living over to the edge of our movement. So today we're early includers of LGBTQ rabbinical students. We have a range of views in our movement on Israel and Palestine. We recently decided to open rabbinical ordination to students with non-Jewish partners. In many ways, we are kind of living into the future as we see it. And I will say this, that we boast, and not only I, but our faculty and our lay people who support us and our congregants who come to our communities, many of us boast that multi-faith is in our DNA. So, from where we sit, the work of seminary interreligious education is urgent, it's deeply meaningful, and now I'll stop and say, in that overused but perfectly apt word, it's complicated. And you, at the end of your talk, began to push at some of what that complication is. So we see ourselves as living at the edge of the Jewish world and situated to grapple with some of the most difficult questions that are being raised by a changing religious landscape. But those questions are not limited to just Jews. These issues already impact, or will in time, many, except if they're living in very secluded communities, all of our communities. And thanks to the Luce Foundation, for whom I'm writing this new grant, we have been able to experiment rather boldly on those issues. So let me back up a little and just tell you a little bit more about Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, who I mentioned at the beginning. In the first half of the 20th century, influenced by John Dewey and William James, Kaplan created an approach to Judaism. This was the first Jewish denomination that was created on American soil. Kaplan understood Judaism as a multivocal and evolving, changing religious civilization of the Jewish people. So his understanding was, rather than being chosen by God, Jews, like everyone else, carry sacred narratives, rituals, practices, traditions. And rather than having any kind of timeless set of truths, our people simply is carrying into the world our flawed human attempt to bring the ethical and the sacred into our lives. So, since its founding, which was only back in 1968 in North Philadelphia, RRC has been teaching Judaism through that understanding. And we have what we call the civilizational approach. So our emphasis has always been on the fact that Jews have lived amongst other people, Jews have learned from other people, and that's been a good thing. And Kaplan had a phrase, peoplehood, that kind of encapsulated his understanding back in the 1940s. You have to remember then that the Jewish intermarriage rate was tiny. Even in 1970s, the intermarriage rate of Jews was only 20%. Many American Jews were only 1 or 2 generations away from immigration to this country. The Nazi Holocaust was still in close memory when we were founding our school. So we remembered that setting and to understand where we're now going to shift to and when I start talking about some of the challenges. So in 1982, our school moved from North Philadelphia, where we were close to Temple University, to a suburban campus. And at that time, we established a Department of Religious Studies. And I was the chair of the department, the only member of the department, and I was a quarter time. So you can imagine that I just held my faculty meetings in my shower. It saved time. And all of our professors in the entire department were adjuncts. So we had some wonderful teaching in those days. I'm going to say very briefly, because I could talk about this for maybe 3 hours. We had a professor of Islam as early as the early 90s who came in and taught the students about Islam. However, after September 11th, 2001, we realized that our program in Islam, I'm going to get back to the rest in a minute, was woefully inadequate. How we realized that was that I, who had taken courses in Islam by that very same professor from Temple when I was getting my doctorate, had no idea how to sit on a panel with Muslims. After September 11th, I was invited to come, and I said, oh, who's the Protestant, who's the Catholic? They said, oh, no, actually the Christians have to share one seat, and the third seat is going to be a Muslim. I'm like, I don't really know that much about Muslim Americans. This, living in Philadelphia, in a city where we have many, many Muslims and a vibrant, especially African-American Muslim community. Anyway, I quickly realized I had a lot of work to do, and my students would have to benefit from it if I did it well. And so what I did was I tried to discover many, many different ways to try to do a better job of preparing our students to be allies for Muslim Americans in this country at this time. And that work has become more urgent this year than ever, as we've seen a rise of Islamophobia in this country, in some part related to the presidential primaries of one particular party, and we won't go into all that right now. Let me just say that's a huge topic that my commitment to remains unabated, but I'm going to talk about something else, which has to do with what I set the ground for before about peoplehood and about our concern for understanding ourselves as part of a people. So the peoplehood question has become more complicated. When we first started to draw attention to the post-ethnic trends in American religious life, when those trends started to become obvious to us, a man by the name of Stephen M. Cohen wrote, we should not applaud the shift to a porous, self-constructed, voluntary identity. We must take wary cognizance of post-ethnicity. We must contend with it rather than to surrender. So I will say that our movement doesn't agree. Our movement says we are not interested in hand-wringing, we are not interested in contending, but neither are we interested in surrendering. What we're trying to do is do an active engagement. And we would say, and I think I'm quoting my dean here, that while the liberal denominations, most of them, now have non-Jews in their pews, probably none of the established ones have gone quite so far as we have to value them as full-fledged members of our community. And that means something about the kinds of students that we're now seeing coming to us. When our students had clearly defined boundaries of self as Jewish, passionate, on fire, like you said, for their identity, challenging as it was, we prepared them to listen and learn about Christians, and then maybe a little later about Muslims. But many of our students now live the diversity of our American experience daily, as Rabbi Sean mentioned earlier today. The other is not other. And we are working with people with hybrid identities, with multiple identities, and with a sense of understanding identity differently than people in my generation did. When we first conceptualized the challenge of including multi-faith learning, we thought of it only as a competition for scarce resources. So we used to confess in our grant proposals, unfortunately, there are so many other things that our students need to learn about the languages and rhythms of Jewish life. We're constantly struggling to find time in the curriculum to address there are gaps in those issues along with our important multi-faith offerings. We've changed the way we talk about that now. As our RRC student community becomes more diverse, our students' grounding in Jewish traditions is increasingly in need of enrichment. And many of our faculty members say it's going to take a lot to turn these wonderful human beings, Americans, into vessels of Torah, living exemplars of an albeit contemporary version of our religious tradition. And they want the students to have more time and energy to lead their communities, to learn how to lead their communities in a more robust embrace of full-force Jewish living. And guess what? Those of us who care about the multi-faith education and the social justice education don't disagree. So we are actually working to try to understand how we can double dip, if you will, do both at the same time, teach our students some of the same things that our colleagues are telling us and we agree they really need, at the same time that we prepare them for living in this very challenging multi-faith religious environment. So I'm going to skip over now and just tell you about one of our programs that we do, because I think it's the one that I'm the most excited about. And Bobby Brightman and Francesca Nuzzolese, who are sitting in this room, are part of it. And we are seeing it as a way to move forward, to try to engage our students in both a deeper grounding in who they are, as well as a heart-opening, wider sense of what's out there in the world for spiritual growth. And what it has to do, and I don't have time to explain all this, is shifting somewhat the definition, the paradigm of peoplehood into a paradigm, a complementary paradigm of spiritual wisdom tradition. So Judaism is and continues to be a people, but it also is, along with many others, including secular humanists, a spiritual wisdom tradition with its unique particular practices by which people make that spiritual wisdom part of the way they live their daily lives. And so we have a program called Cultivating Character, a conversation across communities, in which we share embodied spiritual practices across communities. And what we've done in this very room on various occasions with Jews, Buddhists from the Wan Seminary, Christians, Muslims, humanists, using our different vocabularies and our different ways of doing things. We don't do theological dialogue. We actually don't even talk about texts and comparing the texts. We certainly don't talk about our political or historical ways in which we contest one another. What we do is we try to share and teach each other our spiritual practices with the invitation of the other people in the room to join as comfortable. So this is not interfaith worship. It's not bringing a service that's the lowest common denominator. It's actually a way of having everybody come to the table with what they're most proud of, which means the most to them, which is my spiritual practice that I do to help me work on what I find hard in my own character, the traits I'm trying to develop to show up as the best possible person I can, to do the work I want to do in the world. And then I hear Francesca tell me what she does. And we don't just tell, though. That's the other thing. So Francesca teaches us Lectio Divina. We all practice Lectio Divina. I was telling someone at lunch that we had a wonderful session with Francesca, where some of you may not know, that's listening for the spiritual lesson. What is God trying to tell me in this text? Francesca read the parable of the prodigal son 3 different times. Those of you who are Christian are like, yes, that's what Lectio Divina is. It's 3 times, I know. But those of you who aren't Christian don't know that. So I'm just sharing. This is a very wide audience, and it's hard to know where to hit. But, okay, so we hear the Lectio Divina 3 times. And then Francesca invites us each time to listen. And one of the Muslim women in the group with Francesca said, I've been listening to Quran all my life, and I keep telling people the most important thing is not reading it in a book, it's listening. Never occurred to me to read the same passage 3 times and ask the people to listen each time for a different message. And then after we all heard it 3 times, Francesca asked each one of us to pray for the person on our left, having heard what that person said they thought they were hearing as the spiritual message as they listened. And so we had this amazing opportunity, she'll confess that it really was quite remarkable, where we all started to feel very, very open and close to one another very quickly, because we were coming from our deepest particularity. Nobody was trying to water anything down, make it palatable, say, oh, well, let me just say something that everybody in the room will agree with. Not at all. It was just the opposite. So I'm just going to end by saying that I actually have been using that method, hoping to use that method in a big program for training college chaplains, because we are very concerned at RRC with the college campus as being the ground zero of a lot of the differences in our society, both political, racial, religious, and other, which come to the fore as young people find themselves in a very diverse environment for sometimes the first time in their lives. And for some, it's the most diverse environment they'll ever live in their entire lives. So the campus is really the place that we have begun to think about, where can we bring this interfaith awareness? And we're focusing on the campus chaplains and religious professionals, because they are the ones who are tasked, often by their denomination or religion, to show up and serve their flock. So if you're a Hillel rabbi or a Mennonite minister sent by the Mennonite church to be on the campus, yet you arrive, and who do you find? You find young people who themselves are beginning to question. Well, 30% of them are signing up as nuns, and not N-U-Ns, but N-O-N-Es. And they're signing up as people who are not sure. And then there are those who are coming from families where, yeah, I'm a Presbyterian, my mother was Jewish though, and I don't really know. And then there are people who were wounded by their original religious location and are trying to figure out how are they going to find a spiritual path, and how are they going to cultivate ethical virtues in themselves. So we're trying to work with these chaplains to say, we want to learn from one another and have a rich experience in an interfaith context that's spiritually sustaining for you guys, you women and men. And then you go back to your campuses and do this work with the other religious professionals that you work amongst. And that's what we're about right now. So thank you for listening.